Hi, everybody, and that's our royalty-free music brought to you by LAB415. I'm Mark Viale. Welcome to LAB415 Spotlight on Marketing with TV and CTV. This is our first of many events where we're going to be interviewing industry experts, startup founders, marketing leaders, and really just talking about their journeys with growth and learning more about how sort of their journey. First, a quick intro on LAB415. We're a growth acceleration company, and we aim to become your strategic partner in all things performance marketing. We focus on the acquisition side, but we also get involved on retention as we want those customers to keep coming back. Right to our topic. Our topic is no stranger to growth. As you'll see with most companies that get to the next level, they do have TV in their advertising mix. Today, we have an amazing cast of industry experts that are going to talk about their experience with TV and how do they think of TV in the advertising mix. Our first speaker is going to be Slayton Carter. He's the VP of Marketing at Ahara, and he led acquisition marketing at The RealReal from startup, small garage startup, all the way through IPO, and he stayed a couple of years later. And he's going to talk about TV, his experience, how it came to The RealReal, what was the situation, and then, what do you need to do to get ready for doing a TV ad from the client side or the advertiser side. And then he's also going to talk about how TV plays in the mix today. And then our next guest is going to be Susan Rowe. She's a media expert with over 35 years of experience. She's worked on with some of the greatest agencies, Cara Interactive, Ogilvy, LAB415, and she's also worked on some great brands. Most recently, she did direct response media work for the Farmer's Dog, and she just brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. And she's going to talk about TV, how it's evolved, the evolution of CTV in the mix, and then how do you structure a test. And so you're going to really want to listen to that because there's a lot of confusion out there. And then last but not least, so you're going to want to stay all the way to the end, is CEO founder Meryl Draper of Quirk Creative. And if you don't know Quirk Creative, they're the one-stop shop for all things video advertising. And you probably have seen their work on Babbel, Caraway, Curology, Rebag, to name a few brands. I've worked with Quirk a couple times. And what I love about Quirk is they sort of they get their direct response focus, but they have the brand advertising and awareness piece also in mind. Okay, that's a lot of Mark. So I'm going to set it up with Slayton. He's going to go into how TV expands your market, the halo effect, and how it really crystallizes your message when you go through this exercise. But why don't you talk about what was the situation that brought TV to The RealReal?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. So yeah, I think like a lot of people, before The RealReal, I was there for 9 years, all said and done, but I had not had direct experience with TV before The RealReal. And really what we learned pretty quickly was that the digital channels that we had seen pretty good performance in, we were on track in terms of our financial plan for CAC. But what we noticed was that as we put additional dollars into those channels that we had leaned on, primarily Google, Facebook, some PLA, product listing ad vendors that were very popular within the fashion world, that when we put incremental dollars, we weren't getting the same return back on those dollars that we had been accustomed to. So we had a scale issue. And so really what we started thinking about is like, how can we really efficiently fill in the top of funnel and broaden our message out efficiently to a much broader audience. And TV is obviously a place people start thinking about when they're in that position. So that really explains like why we got into TV, and we are seeing, you know, escalating CPCs as on the digital channels that was giving us some concern. And so when we decided to make the move into TV, we were going into it knowing that this is new. This is something that we're going to have to test and learn and figure out if this is going to provide that top of funnel traffic that will feed through the funnel and help us build our and scale our business efficiently. What I would say is, like, you know, any kind of marketing team that's looking at TV needs to make sure that there are a couple things that handful of things that are in place prior to even investing those dollars. One is that you need to make sure you really understand your conversion rate, the performance of your current site, as it correlates to new traffic coming in, pretty low intent traffic. And why I say that is because TV is going to bring in a lot of visitors that don't have a ton of intent. So what you'll need to make sure is, like, you've got to have a plan in place to capture at a pretty high level email address, phone number, some way to communicate back to those people and pull them down funnel through owned channels. Yeah, you can set up like remarketing pixels and remarket those audiences, but that's just going to add on to the expense of acquiring that customer. So you really need to lean on your own channels, email, SMS, to again, and a content strategy to bring re-engage those people that saw your TV commercial, bring them back to purchase and down the funnel. So that's super key.
And one of the other things that I think surprises a lot of folks, because, you know, when you're doing Google advertising, and this, a lot of startups start out just doing Google and then paid social, I guess Bing nowadays. But you know, one thing is everybody's worried about their Google reviews. But when we started with TV at the Real Real, it's like, oh my goodness, they found us on Trustpilot. They found us on SiteJabber, Yelp. And talk to us a little bit about what you did there.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point, Mark, is that as people see your TV commercial, where do they turn? They turn to Google and they start looking at, you know, say your brand plus reviews as a keyword search. And what'll pop up is Trustpilot, SiteJabber, all these kind of third-party review sites that you might not even paid attention to until that point that you start to see some comments and some traffic on those sites for your brand. So it's really important that you look at that, make sure that you've got like good reviews and have those buttoned up before you really start investing heavily, because that's where the first kind of impression is going to be established by some of that audience.
And I see it all the time when I'll go look at some of my friends who are running TV, and I'll go to their Trustpilot and it's like 2 out of 5 and 50 reviews. Right. I'm like, guys, you're going to erase all that goodness of TV. The other thing that I think that was so important at the Real Real was we had an MTA, a multi-touch attribution tool in place. And I think I talk to Susan about this all the time. If you don't have one, you're either all the goodness of a campaign will be forgotten, or you're going to do last click and like, you're going to double down on stuff that's not working.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's not to, diminish it. I think it's like, the key to success is always going to be data. So data is paramount in all of this. TV is, of course, inherently difficult versus a digital channel to ingest that data and make sense of it. But there are solutions out there, Rock4Box being one of them that I've used in the past, that can actually ingest log files of where your commercial is airing, the station, the program, the time that it aired, and then you apply basically a spike model to look at whether within a 5 to 10 minute window you saw site traffic bump, and some, I would say, high level KPIs, meaning like email capture, lead capture is a good one to look at to really understand, like, did this buy have any impact on generating traffic back to the site? So that's incredibly important. As we all know, in the marketing world, it's all about the quality of the data and making sure that you're able to get a read on it quickly and make adjustments and optimizations. And so having that in place really gives you the flexibility and the to be able to optimize that spend very efficiently, and make sure that you're buying the right type of inventory for your business.
Yeah, now just a quick plug for a company that, and you should work with them. If you are just living off of Google Analytics or GA4 to figure out your attribution or your native advertising platforms, you should look at fairing.co, and it's a nice, it's a post-conversion survey tool where they actually do dynamic answers to figure out where you are. It's really inexpensive, and it really unearths that direct traffic and, TikTok as well. And so it's something, and it will show TV and outdoor and all that stuff. That's something that you should play around with, but we definitely recommend an MTA with a company like a Rocker Box. And there's a couple other ones out there, but some of them just handle digital, and you want to be able to handle TV as well. Just real quickly, and then we'll move over to Susan. If you were to advertise today to like a Gen Z audience, how would you think of TV in the mix?
I mean, I think you have to be on connected TV. They're overwhelmingly, that's how they're consuming TV. Is not through linear, but it's on connected TV. One word of caution, however, is that ultimately, as you kind of think through your strategy, one key thing that you really have to be aware of, whatever audience you're trying to target, demographic or whatnot, is not to get enamored by the targeting capability of CTV. There are a lot of options that you can go down that path and get very granular and start to layer on a lot of different requirements on that audience. What that's going to ultimately translate into, however, is a much higher CPM. And that's why linear still works, because even though it is like declining year over year in terms of viewership, it's that you can find some very bargain basement CPMs. And typically what you see on CTV is the starting point even is 2 to 3x, like what you might be able to get.
Oh yeah, even more
linear. Yeah,
even more. And that's a great segue into Susan. Susan, again, over 35 years of media experience, and I always go to her. She brought TV into the Real when Slayton and I were there, and just give us a little bit just a top level. You could probably talk about this for hours, but just top level view on like what's evolved in the last 10 years with TV and CTV.
That's an excellent question, Mark. So, like all things, I mean, we saw this happening with other media types over time as well, that we're seeing CTV starting to really grow quickly compared to what we're seeing with linear, and linear is declining. But that doesn't mean that you have to give up linear. You still need to a certain degree, depending on your target, you still need to add linear into your mix. And the issue with CTV is that, yes, it looks big when you look at it from all angles, how many people are using CTV. The issue is that there's big chunks of it that we can't advertise in. Like Netflix, well, there is an option, but it's only $4 less per month, so people aren't choosing it. But there are other things as well, like Apple and HBO. So there are people that are Max. There are people that are moving into an ad-free environment, And that's being collected as part of CTV overall. And that's not really fair. You just have to look at what is advertising. The other trick that I've been using is that there are some things where even like Hulu Live, you don't want to watch 3-week-old news. So I've been using things like MSNBC, Fox, CNN, and I run on linear, but they also show up on Hulu. So you get that double whammy of both CTV and linear, but you're paying a much lower CPM on linear.
And so that's a great talk about into moving from linear into CTV. How do you feel like if somebody came to you? 'Cause I think all the time people are like, oh, TV's for old people, how do you think about, talking to the under 45 market on with TV and CTV?
So that's also a really good question. They're, as Slayton mentioned, they're really available on CTV, not as available on linear, but they watch a lot of television. And the other side of the coin is that I have not found anything that is as effective as convincing people to come to your site and buy something as video. I mean, video can really and I know Meryl will be talking about this later, video makes a huge impact in your overall business and getting people to come to the site. So I think it's really important to just focus in on CTV in that case and not in the linear product, because they have moved into streaming, mainly originally for price a few years ago, right? And that's what drove them in the beginning. And they've stuck there and they've dropped their more linear type programming.
Yeah. So what do you see? Because, you were mentioning that Max and Netflix, they have a big audience, well, somewhat large, but they just don't have a huge advertising mix. What do you think they're going to have to do to actually, because we hear all the stories about Disney, how they're like, struggling to figure out how to make their streaming channels work because, it's not equaling to the ad revenue from linear.
Right. My argument is that subscription is not enough to sustain anybody. That's going to be very difficult to make big profits in CTV over time. And you're going to have to add some advertising. So even some of these, like Apple, perhaps at some point will have to have advertising because they're going to recognize that they're not able to get the type of premium programming that will drive people to their site to watch it or drive to the streaming program. And so then they end up not getting enough people subscribing, and it becomes this sort of vicious cycle. And they have to add advertising. I mean, that really is the way that you bring yourself. I mean, I worry even about sports because advertising, I mean, think about it, 30-second in Super Bowl was $7 million. How are you able to reach those audiences in a streaming environment? Yeah. That is scary to me, that we may lose some of our sports over time if people are trying to flip it into a no commercial type program.
So here's a really good question, because I know a lot of folks that are tuning in want to know, how do I get started with a media plan? Like, what's the best way to structure a test? Because I know, you and I have worked with several folks where they just want to do like a $50,000 test and run it for 30 days and that's it. And see if TV conquered. How do you figure out how to set up a good test for somebody?
So that's an excellent question. So I've merged over the years the tools that we have in the branding side of the fence to understand more about the target, to understand about what competitive is doing, to really get into objectives and strategies. And then I come up with a test, and I'm very cognizant that we should not spend a penny more of our clients' money than we have to. But we need a certain amount of frequency so we can get a statistically reliable read on performance and then be able to optimize. Otherwise, we will not be able to improve the buy over time. And then you really won't get a real good sense of how this is going to work for you, because you can take it down by quite a bit. And then you can see where it's going to go going forward if you go and approach it that way, where you're putting a test in and you need multiple networks, you need multiple day parts, and you also don't test in day parts that work down the road. but you really take your prime day parts, the ones that work the best for you in a DR environment. And then I keep a little eye to awareness, just a little bit. I'm always thinking that awareness is also part of the play. And that's kind of exactly what happened with Farmer's Dog over time, is we went from pure DR into a mix of branded DR.
We could have a whole hour talking about the Farmer's Dog. It's a great story. But tell me a little bit. So every time we talk to a new client, a startup, their board is like, don't talk about linear, go into CTV because it's super targeted. And Slayton talked a little bit about that with the CPMs. You get the targeting, but then you're doing a 40 CPM versus maybe $4 CPM with a mix. And talk a little bit about the frequency issue, because there isn't with the reach versus frequency on CTV.
Yeah. So the problem with CTV is that it's not a huge reach, and that you tend to over frequency. So you have to have really strong caps on anything that you're doing on the CTV side of the fence. On the linear side of the fence, you really are looking at a certain amount of frequency in order to make sure that that audience is being exposed to your message, because we do know frequency has a bearing on your ability, on your response. So it's really important that we don't look at, for example, the first week's results. We wait until we get some really good frequency against the audience on the linear side of the fence in order to be able to get that confidence level. And we've started to adapt that to CTV as well, where we're waiting a couple of weeks to see that frequency load up before we start making judgments on the efficacy of that. And then I just simply line it up. Where does CTV fit against the linear schedule from a performance perspective? And that's how we go forward. And often it ends up in the middle of the pack or a little bit above that. And so you've got a lot of linear choices that are actually more efficient. And then you go into CTV. And then maybe you go into more linear if you've got the money.
And then one last question before we go over to the creative side. A lot of folks will be like, they'll be in 10 markets, say. Like they'll be an online company and they'll have like 8 to 10 markets with a brick and mortar store. And they're like, Susan, I just want to do local advertising. I don't want to do a national buy because I feel it's wasted. What can you do there?
So that is just a question, because what you do is you look at how much it costs you to buy those local markets, and you're really subjected to mainly local broadcast in a local market. Cable is really fragmented in terms of the amount of ratings that you get in a local market. And it can also be purchased by zone, which pushes the price up of cable in a local market. You just figure out how much it's going to cost you to buy locally to cover those 10 markets. And you compare it to what it would cost to put the same amount of effort into those markets, the same amount of reach and frequency, or rather the same amount of spots on a national basis. And if the math works, you go national because it's much more effective. And then you've also sort of primed up those markets that you're going to be expanding into. And every time you add a market, it's free because you're buying on a linear environment across the country. CTV, we do hold to just buying the footprint, the specific footprint, because it doesn't give you that kind of break that you get on linear.
Yeah, and I think so. Both these things, the CTV with linear and then local versus national, these are balancing acts. You have to do the math equations. Like, if I go more targeted in CTV versus more broad, will my ad do 10 times more? Will it be more effective than being less targeted? And so these are things we go through with a client. The other thing is, as we move over to Meryl, is like, it doesn't matter how great your site is ready for TV or how great the media plan is. If your creative is not really has a crystal message, it's going to be really hard. So talk to us about how important creative is.
I mean, if you ask Nielsen, they're going to say it's really important. There's a great study that Nielsen historically has updated, I think, every couple of years. And consistently in that study, it's been found that creative think the latest stat is 49%, has 49% of the impact on sales lift that's attributed to an ad campaign. And that's more than reach, it's more than the brand, it's more than frequency. So it's the biggest chunk of the pie. Creative matters in terms of whether this is going to work for your brand or not. But I think where people get caught up is, what does that mean? What is a good creative? And in my opinion, it's a combination of three things. When you're talking about CTV or linear TV, it really is three things. One, the production quality of a spot. Unlike TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, where a lo-fi creative actually works better than something a little bit more polished, I think about kind of what I call the sandwich rule on CTV and linear TV, where chances are you're going into these channels for the first time, your ad is going to be sandwiched between two really expensive spots, one for Coca-Cola, one for Nike, and then there's your spot. So production quality to the consumer equals trust. So it's really important to think about that. So that's the first part. The second part is an idea or an insight, a real consumer insight. Is your creative built on a consumer insight? And the real reason this is important is because it's going to determine whether or not your audience actually cares about what you have to say in 15, 30, 60 seconds or whatnot. And the third component of a good creative is the action driving strategy. And this is where understanding what levers to pull in a creative, how to drive a call to action, how to dial up, a storyline or script or visuals that get your audience to do what you want them to do is really, really important. So I think it's important to kind of know the definition of a good creative and then act accordingly for your campaign.
And I know and I've worked with Quirk a couple times, and like we're at the Real and like we were so focused on direct response, and like our message was so important. And I agree with you so much that you have to, what you're solving with your ad, there has to be a real problem in the market and you don't want to spend all this time on the problem because it just should sink right away.
Exactly.
And, but when I went to Meryl with a project, I'm a sucker for and I know a lot of startups are like this too. I'm a sucker for the brand ad. And, the one that makes you cry, the one that makes you laugh. And Meryl's like, but you know what? If we do that for you, it's great. It's beautiful, but you're not going to get sales. And you're going to come back and say TV didn't work. So talk to us about how you work through that with a lot of clients.
Well, I think historically, when brands have wanted to go into kind of a mass audience channel like linear TV or CTV, this question around how brand should we go in our creative or how direct response should we go in our creative comes up quite a lot. And historically, there's kind of been the risky way of approaching linear TV and CTV, which is come up with an insane idea that is going to really drive PR and get people talking. And who cares if there's actually a call to action at the end, because they're going to remember this ad and that's going to drive sales. That's quite a risky strategy. It works probably like 1 out of every 50 times. Like it either lands or it doesn't, the idea. And then there's kind of been the more straightforward way of building traction on those channels. And it's kind of the hardcore DR way, which is late night infomercials. You've got the 1-800 number blaring at 2 a.m. Call now, promo upon promo upon promo. My argument and our thesis at Quirk, which we have experimented with over the years and proven to be true, is that you actually can find a middle ground. You can craft a creative that is designed strategically to drive as many sales as an infomercial. It's got all those elements, but does justice to your brand in terms of the look and feel and the tone. And that is how we build brands at Quirk, is by thinking about the balance between brand and DR and making sure that that is conveyed in the creative. And that is really what I think about is as performance advertising of 2023. That's what I think is required in this day and age for our consumers today.
Yeah, and Quirk's really good at that. I have to say, they really guide you through that process. And one thing that to think about is after you do so much direct response and you get, you want everybody to be happy with the performance so they keep on investing in it because you need an ROI on these things. So direct response works in the beginning, but eventually you can evolve to a more brand, focused ad. And we've seen lots, Farmer's Dog, they did a lot of direct response. And then they did the beautiful Super Bowl ad that was all about dogs, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that, yeah.
I was just going to respond to that, Mark, because I think it's a really interesting idea what you're describing, which is kind of the journey of creative along the life cycle of a brand. And an early stage brand is a brand under pressure to prove itself. And so there has to be a certain amount of focus and determination to drive results, ROI, sales, new customer acquisition in those early campaigns and those early creative approaches. And as that builds, you're absolutely right. And one of a lot of our customers that we work with and the brands we work with that work with us year over year is the ability to graduate into something that's a little bit more storytelling once they've established that baseline credibility through a little bit more DR creative.
And you've talked a little bit about your process already, but during your process before, the client spends a lot of money on production and they're going out the door with this ad. And also, sometimes the client won't believe you. They think that they have one version that's going to work better than the direct response version or whatever. And tell me about your process. How do you test those things before we go out and spend a lot of money on production and media?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because the reality of it is, as a creative agency owner, is that I believe that anyone can have a great creative idea. And what will set apart a great creative idea that works or a great creative idea that doesn't work is in validation and testing throughout the process, because creative is subjective. What I like, Mark, is different than what you like, what Susan likes, what Slayton likes. It's very subjective. You like blue, I like red, yada, yada. So what we try to do at Quirk is kind of de-risk the creative decision-making process. And going back to that Nielsen study, which, has conveyed this creative decision that you make, the concept that you arrive at is going to be really important. The way we de-risk that at Quirk is through validation of concepts before we ever shoot a single thing. Before we show up on the shoot day, before any talk of production, we like to validate our decision-making through just basic animatic testing, A/B testing of concepts in storyboard format. Long before any actors are hired, locations are booked, crew are on the ground. So the testing of concept animatics is super, super important. And then the second part of that is knowing that, if you are a brand and you are working with an agency and you are spending X amount of dollars and you're walking away with one 30-second ad or 130 and 115-second ad, you're kind of getting a run for your money, or you're not getting a run for your money. You need to be demanding variations. And that's the other thing that we do with our clients is make sure we have variations of scripts, of creatives, of concepts even, so that when a campaign does launch in market on channels, there can be testing long after the launch date.
Yeah. And, back to Susan, also you start out with a 30-second ad spot, and then you want to have a 15-second but you want to start out that 30-second to get enough mention of the brand out there.
Yes.
But tell me about, in real quicks, tell me about how you're addressing clients' needs that are coming to you about addressing Gen Z. Because I know you guys are not just TV, you're one-stop shop.
Yeah. Well, what we have found for Gen Z is that video, Susan mentioned this earlier, video is really important to driving, conversions in this day and age. That is definitely true for Gen Z. And what we have found to be effective is a multi-platform approach. So if we're on CTV, we also need to be on TikTok. If we're on TikTok, we also need to be on CTV, and we need to be showing up where Gen Z is consuming media. And the way we approach that without breaking the bank for brands that we work with, who have budgets of all shapes and sizes, is by approaching any kind of shoot as kind of a content capture opportunity. And when we're creating fit for platform content, being really mindful of best practices of those channels. So like I mentioned on CTV and linear TV, production quality is going to be really important to driving good creative. The same is true for TikTok. If we're also shooting for TikTok to reach Gen Z, we actually are shooting those ads right next to the $1 million camera on an iPhone. You know, we're doing more UGC style content. So in sum, it's about being really aware of where Gen Z is showing up. And for us, the no-brainers are TikTok and CTV, and also producing content that is fit for those channel best practices instead of trying to repurpose a TV ad for TikTok or vice versa.
We love working with Quirk and partnering with them because they really get the creative part, and then, you know, bringing the data together to justify, you know, what we should change, you know, what we should double down on. And it's just a really good partnership. Any great projects out there that you launched that you want to talk about?
We are working on so many fun projects. I mean, in the spirit of back to school this week, we've got a shoot for a hugely loved dynamic brand in the education space. And it's a really exciting brief because, you know, our creative team really loves having an impact alongside driving business objectives. And it's one of those brands where you feel like it's about helping kids reach their full potential, but it's also about driving business objectives. So we've had a lot of fun on that. And we're simultaneously working on a really meaty financial services brief that's more in the B2B space. And then we always have some CPG brands that we're collaborating with. We've got one that we're actually timely conversation helping to launch into new channels. So evolving from Meta into CTV and linear TV. So
Awesome.
Cross-vertical projects that are really fun in their own regards.
That's great. And let's see if we'll give a few moments here for some questions, if we have any questions coming in from the audience. But, you know, anything from Ahara you want to mention, Slayton?
We're not quite at the TV stage yet, but we're working on some pretty exciting things at Ahara. Namely, what we do as a business is we're focused on precision nutrition, which essentially means that we recognize and provide a service that allows people to understand key nutrients. Everyone's diet should be unique based on their own genes and epigenetics, which essentially is how your genes are responding to certain nutrients. So we're kind of on the bleeding edge of this science. Everything that we provide is science backed. It's research based, so it's not just like pie in the sky, one size fits all solution. We take both through explicit data capture as well as testing methods. We take all of that data and then identify key nutrients that you need to focus on in order to improve your long-term health. And
Exciting
you know,
stuff.
it's something that we all need to be focused on, quite frankly. So,
all right. I think that's it. I don't see any questions coming in, but thank you everybody for joining us. And if you haven't followed us on LinkedIn, LAB415 on LinkedIn, follow us. And I want to thank GSD Solutions for help doing the tech support for this webinar. And we'll be seeing you soon. We really want to do some Gen Z topics coming up. And so we're looking for some folks to discuss those topics in the near future. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
thanks so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.